Do you believe a 70-year-old woman can completely destroy a man's life using only the truth? I'm Eleanor Sullivan, and for 45 years of marriage, I was the perfect devoted wife who never questioned, never suspected, never imagined I was living the biggest lie of my life. But when I discovered that my husband, Ben, had been keeping a second family for over 20 years, using our money to support another woman and 3 children I never knew existed, something inside me woke up. Something he never imagined I could possess, the capacity for revenge. What happened after that discovery was so devastating for him that today, at 73, I can say with certainty, never underestimate a woman who has spent her entire life being underestimated. This is the story of how a seemingly harmless grandmother from St. Genevieve, Louisiana, turned the discovery of an affair into the most epic revenge you've ever heard. And believe me, every word I'm about to tell you is the absolute truth. The phone rang 3 times before I could answer. It was 7 in the morning on an ordinary Tuesday in St. Genevieve, and I was still making coffee when that unfamiliar voice changed my life forever. "Hello, is this Eleanor?" a woman asked with a thick Bayou accent. "Yes, this is she," I answered, drying my hands on the embroidered apron I've worn for 15 years. "I need to talk to you about our husband." "Our husband?" The words echoed in my head like distant thunder. I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the scent of the magnolia blossoms Ben had planted in the yard a decade ago. Everything around me seemed normal. But those 2 words had just shattered 45 years of my life. "Our husband," I managed to repeat, my voice a hoarse whisper. The woman on the other end of the line sighed deeply. "My name is Nancy, and Ben has been my partner for 22 years. We have 3 children together." My whole body trembled. My legs gave out, and I had to lean on the kitchen table where I had served Ben lunch so many times when he returned from his business trips. Ben Sullivan, my husband of 45 years, the father of my 2 children, Charles and Rose, the man who slept beside me every night he was in town, the same man who kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for the morning market, where he'd sold seafood since he was a young man, the man who promised me fidelity before the altar of St. Joseph's Church, right here in St. Genevieve, in 1978. "This must be a mistake," I muttered, more to myself than to Nancy. But something in her voice, a painful certainty, made me keep listening. "He doesn't wear a ring with me," she continued. "Always said he didn't like jewelry, but I thought it was strange when I saw the indentation on his finger last week. So I asked Jolene, our oldest, and she told me she saw him talking to a woman at a market in New Orleans. She heard them call the woman Ben's wife." My world came crashing down. Every word from Nancy was like a stab to the chest. I knew Ben traveled a lot for work, especially to the New Orleans area, where he said he had important clients for the seafood business. Sometimes he'd be gone for weeks, but he always came back with extra money and gifts for me. Flowers, cheap perfume, sometimes a colorful blouse he'd buy at a street fair. I never suspected a thing. I never had a reason to. "Are you still there?" Nancy asked, and I realized I'd been silent for several minutes. "I am," I replied, my voice fading. I need to think about this." I hung up the phone and let myself fall into the wooden chair my father had made for me when I got married, the same place where I had nursed my children, where I had helped with their homework, where I had planned so many dreams beside Ben. The tears came slowly at first, then like a storm. I cried until I had no strength left, until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen. Clara, my neighbor of 40 years, knocked on the door around 9. "Eleanor, are you okay? I didn't see you putting out your laundry today." I pretended I had a headache and asked her to come back later. I couldn't face anyone right then. I spent the entire day replaying every detail of my life with Ben. The long trips that started 22 years ago, exactly when Nancy said she began living with him. The times he came back more affectionate, more attentive, as if trying to make up for something. The nights he was too tired to talk, saying work was just wearing him out. The Sundays he spent sleeping, recovering for the next trip. When Ben came home that night, at 8 o'clock as usual, I was sitting on the porch, looking out at the bayou. He greeted me with the usual kiss on the forehead, but this time it felt like a stranger was touching me. "How was your day, my love?" he asked, sitting in the chair beside me. The same question as always, with the same loving tone as always, but now I knew they were empty words. "Ben," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I need to ask you a question, and I want you to give me an honest answer." He looked at me with those brown eyes that had made me fall in love almost 5 decades ago. "Of course, Eleanor. What is it?" I took a deep breath, mustering all the courage I could find. "Do you have another family?" The silence that followed was deafening. Ben stared at me for long seconds, and I saw something shift in his expression. The initial surprise gave way to a resignation that confirmed everything. He lowered his head and sighed. "How did you find out?" he asked, and those 4 words destroyed any hope I had that it was all a terrible misunderstanding. "So it's true," I whispered, feeling the world spin around me. "Nancy called me this morning." Ben's head shot up. "Nancy called you?" There was anger in his voice, and that hurt me even more. He wasn't sorry he had cheated on me. He was angry he'd been caught. 45 years, Ben," I said, the tears starting to fall again. 45 years of my life dedicated to you, to our family, to our home. How could you do this to me?" He stood up and started pacing the porch. "Eleanor, I can explain. It's not what you think, but I knew it was exactly what I thought. And worse." "Then explain," I said, crossing my arms. "Explain how you managed to keep 2 families for over 20 years. Explain how you came home and kissed me after kissing another woman. Explain how you slept in my bed knowing you had children with someone else." Ben stopped pacing and faced me. "She gave me something you didn't anymore," he said, and those words hit me like a gunshot. "Nancy is younger. She makes me feel alive again. You got old, Eleanor. All you do is complain, talk about problems with the house, with the kids. She gives me joy." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I was breathless for a few seconds, processing the cruelty of the words from the man I had loved my entire adult life. "So you blame me?" I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "You blame me for growing old by your side, for taking care of your house, your children, for waiting for you to come back from every trip." "I'm not blaming anyone," he answered, but his voice sounded defensive. "Things just happened. I was working in New Orleans. I met Nancy, and she made me feel like a young man again. It wasn't planned." I stood up from my chair, feeling a strength I didn't know I still had inside me. "Not planned? 22 years weren't planned. 3 children weren't planned." The argument continued late into the night, but Ben showed not an ounce of remorse. On the contrary, he seemed relieved to finally be able to talk openly about his second life. He told me about Jolene, 21, who was finishing up at community college. About Marcus, 18, who worked at an auto shop. About the youngest, Patricia, 15, who dreamed of being a teacher. Every detail was a new wound. He knew the dreams of the children he had with another woman. He knew their personalities, their fears, their joys. They had a present father, while our own children, Charles and Rose, now adults with their own families, had always complained about their father's absence during their teenage years. When we finally went to sleep at 2 in the morning, we lay in the same bed, but I felt as if there were a chasm between us. Ben fell asleep quickly, as he always did, but I spent the whole night staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had become such a colossal lie. Beside me slept a man I didn't know, a stranger who had shared my bed for decades, but had a completely different life far away from me. When the sun rose, bringing a new day to St. Genevieve, I knew nothing would ever be the same. I looked at Ben sleeping, his gray hair scattered on the pillow, and I wondered how many mornings he had woken up in Nancy's bed, looking at her the same way I was now looking at him, with the difference that she didn't know he was lying. Or at least, she hadn't known until now. I got up slowly, showered, and made coffee, just as I had every morning for 45 years. But as I stirred the sugar in my cup, a single question echoed in my head. If Nancy had found out about me, what else could she find out about Ben's double life? And more importantly, what was I willing to do with that information? The next few days passed in a blur of pain and confusion. Ben continued his normal routine, leaving for the market in the morning and coming home at night, as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't pretend everything was fine anymore. Every gesture, every word, every smile reminded me of the gigantic lie our life together had become. On Thursday, 3 days after Nancy's call, I decided to do something I had never done in 4 decades of marriage. I went through Ben's things. I waited for him to leave for the market and went to our bedroom, my heart pounding as if I were committing a crime. I opened the dresser drawer where he kept his personal documents, my hands shaking so much I dropped some papers on the floor. It was then that I found the first concrete evidence, a faded photograph hidden beneath his business papers. Nancy was a pretty woman, with long dark hair, smiling beside Ben. They were in front of a house I didn't recognize, and he had his arm around her waist in an intimate, protective way. On the back of the photo, a date, August 15th, 2001, and the words, "Our new home," written in neat cursive. My vision blurred. That same year, Ben had told me he was investing in expanding the business, that he needed more money for new equipment. I had sold the jewelry my mother left me, a pearl necklace and 2 gold rings, to help him raise the money. Now I discovered that money had been used to buy a house for his mistress. I kept looking, and found more. Receipts from purchases in New Orleans, always on dates that coincided with his business trips. Children's medicine, women's clothing, even a receipt from a toy store dated from the previous Christmas. He was buying gifts for the children of his other family, while our own grandchildren barely got a visit from their grandfather. What hurt the most was finding a small day planner, hidden in the inside pocket of an old jacket. In it, Ben noted commitments for both families. Patricia's birthday, March 12th. Marcus's parent-teacher conference, April 15th. Nancy's doctor apt, May 20th. He remembered all the important dates in their lives, while last year he had completely forgotten my birthday. I sat on the bed and cried until I had no tears left. 45 years of my life had been wasted on a man who never truly loved me, or at least, who had stopped loving me long ago, and didn't have the courage to tell me. When I heard the key in the lock, I quickly put everything back and pretended to be tidying the room. "Eleanor!" Ben called from the living room. "I'm in here," I answered, trying to sound normal. He appeared at the bedroom door, and for the first time in decades, I couldn't look him in the eye. "Are you all right? You've seemed down these past few days." The hypocrisy of the question enraged me. He knew exactly why I was this way. "I have to go out," I said, grabbing my purse. "I'm going to Rose's house." Ben nodded, already heading for the bathroom. "Send her and the boys my love," he said, as if he were the caring father-in-law and grandfather he pretended to be. I left the house in such a hurry I forgot to lock the door. Rose, my 42-year-old daughter, lived a 15-minute walk from our house. She was making lunch when I arrived and immediately saw that something was wrong. "Mom, what happened? You look like you haven't slept." I sat at her kitchen table, the same table where we'd talked over family problems so many times, and told her everything. Rose's reaction was one of total shock. "Mom, that can't be true. Dad has his flaws. but he would never do that. I showed her the picture I had secretly taken with my simple phone of the photo from Ben's planner. Rose turned pale. "Oh my God, Mom. This is real?" "He confirmed it himself," I said, my voice thick with emotion. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. Said she makes him feel young, that I got old. Rose shot up from her chair with such force it almost fell over. "He said that to you? That you got old?" The outrage in my daughter's voice gave me a little comfort. At least someone was indignant about how I'd been treated. "Rose," I began, hesitating. "Did you know anything? Did you ever suspect?" She shook her head vigorously. "Never, Mom. Dad was always discreet about those trips. We just thought he was really working." She paused thoughtfully. "But now that you mention it, I remember sometimes he'd come back from trips in a really good mood, more affectionate, and other times he'd arrive irritable, like he was torn between two things. We spent the whole afternoon talking, trying to understand how Ben had managed to maintain this farce for so long. Rose was even more furious when I told her about the money from my jewelry being used to buy Nancy's house. "That's insane, Mom. You're entitled to half of everything you built together. That house he bought for his mistress is yours too. I don't know what to do," I admitted. "I don't know how to deal with this. I loved this man my whole life, Rose. I dedicated all my years to him, to our family, and now I find out that while I was here taking care of everything, he was building a completely different life with someone else." Rose took my hand. "You're going to get through this, Mom. We'll help you. Charles and I won't leave you alone." Charles was my older son, 45, who lived in New Orleans with his family. He was always more reserved than his sister, but he was a good son. "I need to call Charles," Rose said. "He needs to know about this." I agreed, though I knew it would be another painful conversation. Charles was silent for long minutes, as his sister told him everything over the phone. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "I'm coming down to St. Genevieve this weekend. We need to talk to Dad, all of us together." I returned home at dusk to find Ben on the porch reading the newspaper, as he always did. He greeted me normally, asked how Rose and the grandkids were. I pretended everything was fine, but inside I felt like I was playing a part in a very poorly written play. During dinner I tried to eat, but the food tasted like sand in my mouth. Ben talked about the business at the market, about a customer who owed him money, about the price of shrimp going up, banal conversations we'd had for decades, but which now sounded completely hollow. I wondered if he had these same conversations with Nancy, if she knew the same customers, if she knew about the same business problems. "Are you sure you're okay?" Ben asked, noticing I'd barely touched my food. "You've been strange since that day." I almost laughed at the question. That day, as if the discovery of his betrayal was just a minor event I should quickly get over. "I've been thinking a lot," I replied, choosing my words carefully. "About our life, about what we've done together all these years." Ben looked uncomfortable. "Eleanor, I know you're upset, but things aren't that simple. I didn't stop loving you. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, feeling the anger rise inside me. "You think it's complicated to maintain two families? Complicated to lie to two women for over 20 years? Complicated to use the money we saved together to build a life with someone else?" My voice rose, and Ben glanced nervously to the sides, as if the neighbors could hear. "Lower your voice," he said, irritated. "Do you want the whole town to know our business?" That response infuriated me even more. He wasn't worried about hurting me. He was worried about his reputation. "Our business?" I shouted, not caring who might hear. "Our business, Ben? I don't have any business. I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. I didn't build a second family behind anyone's back." Ben got up from the table, clearly annoyed. "I'm going to bed. We'll talk when you've calmed down." He left the kitchen, leaving his dirty dishes on the table, something he had never done in all our years of marriage. Another sign that he no longer cared about the small gestures of respect that kept our relationship working. I was left alone in the kitchen staring at the dirty dishes and feeling the weight of a lifetime of dedication that had been wasted. I washed everything on autopilot, as I always did, but for the first time I wondered why I was still taking care of the house of a man who didn't respect me, why I was still playing the part of the devoted wife for someone who had been dividing his affection and attention with another family for decades. When I went to the bedroom, Ben was already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay on my side of the bed staring at the ceiling and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to pretend everything was okay anymore. I wasn't going to accept crumbs of attention from a man who considered me old and disposable. If he had a second life, it was time for me to find out exactly what that life was like. And then, maybe, it was time for him to find out who Eleanor Sullivan really was when she was no longer willing to accept disrespect. The next morning, I decided to do something I had never done before: follow Ben to the market. I left the house 15 minutes after him, wearing a headscarf and sunglasses I rarely used. I felt ridiculous, like an amateur spy, but I needed to see with my own eyes what his life was like away from me. The morning market was bustling as always, full of vendors shouting prices and shoppers haggling. I found Ben at the stall he'd rented for over 20 years, chatting animatedly with other fishermen. I hid behind a fruit stand, watching. He seemed relaxed, cheerful, completely different from the tense man who came home every night. "Ben's in a good mood today," remarked Mr. Ray, a shrimp vendor I'd known for decades. "Must be 'cause he's heading to New Orleans tomorrow. Always gets like this when he's going to visit his family over there." My blood ran cold. Family over there. They all knew. Everyone at the market knew about Nancy and the kids, and I was the only one who had been kept in the dark. I kept watching for another hour, until I couldn't take it anymore, and went home. The walk back was torture. How many people in St. Genevieve knew about my husband's betrayal? How many looked at me with pity when I walked down the street? How many times had I been the subject of conversations that started with, "Poor Eleanor, she has no idea." When I got home, I went straight to the phone. I needed to call Nancy. I needed to better understand how Ben's double life worked, what lies he told her as well. I dialed the number I had written on a piece of paper during our first conversation. "Hello," Nancy answered, and her voice sent a shiver down my spine. "Nancy, it's Eleanor again." There was a silence on the other end. "I was hoping you'd call," she said finally. "This has all shaken me up too. Can I ask you a question, ma'am?" I agreed, though I feared what was coming. "Did you know he had another family? I mean, before our talk, did you have any suspicions?" The question hurt me deeply. "Never," I answered, my voice choked with emotion. 45 years of marriage, and I never suspected a thing. "And you?" Nancy sighed. "I always thought it was strange he didn't want to officially marry me. Said it was because he didn't believe in paperwork, that love was more important than a license. But now I know it's because he was already married to you." We talked for over an hour, comparing the lies Ben told each of us. To me, he said he traveled for work, that he had important clients in New Orleans who bought large quantities of seafood. To Nancy, he said he traveled to St. Genevieve to care for his sick mother. A cruel lie, since my mother-in-law had passed away 15 years ago. "Miss Eleanor," Nancy said, hesitant, "I need to tell you something. About money." My heart pounded. "Go on," I managed to say. "Ben always gave me money for the house, for the kids. But last month he said he was having trouble with the business, that he needed to cut back my allowance. Do you think it's because he found out I knew about you?" The question made me realize something terrible. Ben wasn't cutting back Nancy's money because of recent discoveries. He was getting older. The business really was bringing in less, and 2 families were becoming too heavy a financial burden for him to carry. Maybe that was why he was more irritable at home lately. "Nancy," I said, gathering my courage, "can you tell me about the house where you live? Did Ben buy it for you?" She confirmed it and told me details that made me feel even more betrayed. The house had 3 bedrooms, a big yard where the kids played, even a covered porch where Ben liked to rest on Sunday afternoons. "He planted flowers in the yard," Nancy continued, not realizing how every word was a stab to my heart. "Red and yellow roses. Said he always wanted to have a beautiful garden. Red and yellow roses were my favorite flowers. I had asked him to plant those same flowers in our yard years ago, but he always said he didn't have time, that flowers were silly. When I ended the call, I felt completely empty. Ben didn't just have a second family. He had created an upgraded version of our life with Nancy. The house he bought for her was bigger and nicer than ours. He planted the garden I always wanted. He was present in his children's lives with her in a way he never was with Charles and Rose. The phone rang again, and for a moment I thought it was Nancy calling back. But it was Clara, my neighbor. "Eleanor, can I come over? I need to talk to you about something." Her voice sounded strange, nervous. I said she could, though I didn't feel like seeing anyone. Clara arrived 10 minutes later, carrying a cup of coffee as she always did when she came to visit. But this time she seemed uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze. "Eleanor," she began, wringing her hands nervously. "I heard you found out about Ben's situation." I felt like I'd been sucker-punched. "You knew?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from her expression. Clara lowered her head. "Yes, Eleanor, I knew. For years, almost everyone in the neighborhood knew. The confirmation made me dizzy. And nobody told me. Nobody thought I had the right to know. It wasn't our place," she said defensively. "It was a matter between you two. Besides, you seemed happy. Ben was always a good husband here at home. Always treated you well. We thought maybe it was better for you not to know." I stood up from the chair, feeling an anger I had never felt before. "Better for me not to know," I shouted. "Better for me to live in a lie for decades. Better for me to keep taking care of the house, washing the clothes, cooking for a man who was cheating on me with another family." Clara backed away, frightened by my reaction. "Eleanor, calm down. You don't have to shout." "Don't have to shout?" I repeated, incredulous. "Clara, you've been my neighbor for 40 years. You've had coffee at my table 1,000 times. You watched my children grow up. You watched me grow old next to a man who was deceiving me. And you never, ever thought I deserved to know the truth." Clara tried to justify herself, but I didn't want to hear it anymore. I asked her to leave my house, something I had never done in our entire friendship. She left offended, saying I was being ungrateful, that she had always been a good neighbor. But I couldn't look at her anymore without feeling rage. When Ben came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room, sitting in the armchair my father had given me as a wedding present. "We need to talk," I said, without getting up to greet him as I always did. He sensed the seriousness in my tone and sat on the sofa, keeping his distance. "I spoke with Nancy today," I began. "We talked a lot about you, about the lies you tell each of us." Ben turned pale. "Eleanor, I can explain." I held up my hand, cutting him off. "I don't want explanations. I want the truth. The whole truth. The house you bought for her is bigger than ours," I continued. "You planted the flowers I always wanted in her yard. You're present in the lives of the children you had with her in a way you never were with our children. You created a better life with her than the one you had with me." Ben was silent for long minutes. When he finally spoke, his words were even crueler than I had expected. "Maybe it's because, with her, I can be who I really am. Here at home, I always felt pressured, criticized. Nancy accepts me as I am. She doesn't question where I'm going, what I'm doing." "Pressured?" I repeated, incredulous. "Criticized? Ben, I never questioned your trips. I never complained when you were gone for weeks. I never demanded explanations about where you were spending our money. How can you say I pressured you? You were always so serious, Eleanor, he replied, and I realized he had been thinking about this justification for a long time. Always worried about the bills, the problems with the house, the kids. Nancy is more laid back, more cheerful. She makes me laugh. Don't miss the next videos. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to stay up to date. Back to the story. I felt like I was listening to a stranger. The man I knew, the man I loved, would never have said such cruel things. Or maybe I had never known the real Ben. Maybe all these years I had lived with a fantasy, an edited version of the man he really was. So you're saying I'm to blame, I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. You're saying you cheated on me for 22 years because I'm too serious, because I worry about our family, our house, our life. Ben avoided my gaze. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just explaining how things happened. That night, I lay in our bed knowing I could never again sleep peacefully, next to this man. He had destroyed not only our marriage, but also my perception of who I was. For decades, I had prided myself on being a devoted wife, a faithful partner. Now I discovered that these qualities I considered virtues were seen by him as flaws. I was too serious, too worried, too old. But for the first time since I discovered the betrayal, I felt something beyond pain and disappointment. I felt anger, a deep, growing anger that was beginning to replace the sadness. Ben had made his choice over 20 years ago. Now it was my turn to make mine. Ben left for New Orleans on Friday, as planned. This time, when he said goodbye with the usual kiss on the forehead, I felt disgusted. I knew exactly where he was going, who he was going to, and what he would be doing for the next 10 days. For the first time in 45 years, I didn't say, "Come back soon," when he walked out the door. I was alone in the house, facing a silence I had never experienced before. It was different from the other times Ben traveled. Before, the loneliness was temporary, filled with anticipation for his return. Now, it was a permanent void, a feeling that even when he came back, I would still be alone. The first day, I tried to maintain a normal routine. I cleaned the house, went grocery shopping, watered the plants in the yard. But with every household chore, I remembered that I was taking care of the house for a man who didn't respect me. I was washing the clothes of someone who considered me old and disposable. I was cooking for a person who would rather be in another house, with another family. On the second day, Rose came to visit and found me still in my nightgown at 2 in the afternoon. "Mom, you haven't gotten dressed today," she asked, worried. I looked at her as if she were a stranger. Why get dressed? For whom? Rose sat next to me on the sofa, holding my hand. "Mom, I know this is hard, but you have to take care of yourself. You can't let this destroy you." But I felt like I was already being destroyed. Every day that passed, I discovered a new lie, a new betrayal, like the fact that Ben had told Nancy I was just a family acquaintance, an older woman he helped out occasionally. "Rose," I said, looking at my daughter, "do you think I did something wrong? Do you think I deserve this?" She hugged me tightly. "Of course not, Mom. You were always a model wife. Dad is the one who's wrong, not you." But Ben's words echoed in my head. I was too serious, too worried, too old. On the third day, Charles arrived from New Orleans, as he had promised. My older son walked into the house with a grim expression I hadn't seen since his childhood. "Mom, where's Dad?" he asked, and for the first time I heard anger in his voice. "He went to New Orleans," I replied, unable to avoid the irony. "For work, of course." "I know where he went," Charles said, sitting down heavily in a kitchen chair. "I saw him yesterday. He was with a woman and 3 young people at a restaurant downtown. They looked like a happy family." The visual confirmation of what I already knew was like another blow. "How did they look?" I asked. hating the curiosity I felt. He was smiling, Mom, more than I remember seeing him smile here at home in recent years. Charles ran a hand over his face, tired. The woman is pretty, younger than you. The kids seemed to really like him. The youngest, who must be about 15, was telling some animated story, and Dad was laughing like it was the most interesting thing in the world. Every word was a stab. Ben gave Nancy's children the attention he had never given Charles and Rose. He laughed at their stories, was interested in their lives. Meanwhile, our children grew up with an absent father who was always too tired or too busy to truly engage with them. Mom, Charles continued, I want you to know that Rose and I will support whatever decision you make. If you want to separate, if you want to stay, if you want to fight for your rights, we're on your side. The solidarity of my children gave me some strength, but it also made me realize how much I had lost. For 45 years, I had built my identity around being Ben's wife. I was Ben's wife, the seafood guy's wife, the mother of Ben's children. Now, discovering he had a second family, who was I? If he preferred to be with Nancy, if he had built a better life with her, what was left of me? On the 4th day of Ben's trip, I woke up with a pain in my chest that made me think I was having a heart attack. Rose took me to the local clinic, where the doctor said it was anxiety. You're going through a difficult time, explained Dr. Stevens, who had known our family for decades. It's normal for the body to react this way, but it didn't feel normal. It felt like I was falling apart inside, as if all the years of dedication and love had been a total waste. When I got home, I looked around and saw our life together differently. The curtains I had sewn with so much care, the family photos scattered around the living room, the furniture we had bought together over the years. It all seemed fake, like a stage set. It was then that I discovered something that almost made me faint. Rummaging through Ben's things again, I found a second wallet, hidden in the back of a drawer. Inside, documents that made me tremble. Ben had opened a bank account using the address of Nancy's house. He had transferred money from our joint account to this new account. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. It was also a financial one. The statement showed he had transferred nearly half of our life savings to the new account. Money we had saved selling seafood for decades, saving penny by penny, dreaming of a quiet old age. He had used our sweat, our sacrifice, to finance his life with another family. When I saw the numbers, I felt a dizziness that made me sit on the floor. It wasn't just the money. It was what it represented. Every dollar transferred was proof that Ben had been planning to leave me for a long time. Every cent taken from our joint account was a preparation for the day he would no longer have to pretend our life together mattered. I called Rose, crying so hard she could barely understand what I was saying. "Mom, I'm on my way," she said, and in 15 minutes she was at my door. When I showed her the bank statements, she turned pale. "This is theft, Mom. He can't do this without your consent." "But he did," I said, my voice a whisper. "He did, and I never knew. I signed the papers he brought home, trusted him completely. I never imagined he would be stealing from me." Rose took the documents, studying each line. "We're going to fix this, Mom. We're going to fight for your rights." But I didn't want to fix it. I wanted to disappear. I wanted this all to be a terrible nightmare I could wake up from. I wanted to go back to the blissful ignorance of a week ago, when I still believed I was loved and respected by the man with whom I had shared my entire life. On the 5th day, I did something I had never done before. I called Nancy again. I needed to know if she knew about the money, if she was an accomplice, or if she was also being deceived. "Nancy," I said when she answered, "I need to ask you something. Do you know where the money Ben gives you comes from?" There was a long silence. "I always thought it came from his work," she replied, but there was hesitation in her voice. "Why are you asking?" I told her about the bank account, about the transferred money, about our years of savings being used to support her family. "Oh my God," Nancy murmured. "I didn't know that. I swear I didn't know. He always said the money came from his job, that he was thriving in the business." For the first time, I felt she was being sincere. We were both victims of Ben's lies, each in our own way. "Nancy," I said, gathering my courage, "do you really love him?" The question slipped out before I could think better of it. "I do," she answered without hesitation. "But now I don't know what's true in our life anymore. If he lied about having a wife, if he lied about the money, what else has he lied about?" We hung up, even more confused than before. I was sure of only one thing. Ben had built his double life on lies to everyone involved. He had deceived me. He had deceived Nancy. He had deceived the children of both families. We were all just pieces in a game where only he knew the rules. When he returned from New Orleans at the end of the week, I was waiting in the living room with the bank statements spread out on the coffee table. Ben walked into the house whistling, as he always did when he came back from his trips. He stopped abruptly when he saw the papers and my expression. "Can you explain this?" I asked, pointing to the documents. Ben looked at the statements, and his face turned gray. "Where did you find this?" he asked, and for the first time since I discovered the affair, I saw fear in his eyes. "In your drawer," I replied, "along with other interesting documents." "Eleanor, I can explain," he began, but I stood up from my chair. "I don't want any more explanations, Ben. I want you to get out of my house." He looked at me as if I had gone mad. "Get out of the house? Eleanor, this is my house too." I felt a strength I didn't know existed within me. "Not after you stole our money to support your other family." The argument that followed was the worst of our life together. Ben tried to downplay what he had done, saying the money was his too, that he had the right to do what he wanted with the savings. "You don't understand business, Eleanor," he said in a desperate attempt to convince me. "I was investing that money, making it grow." "Investing!" I shouted, completely losing my composure. "You call using our money to buy a house for your mistress and support the children you had with her an investment?" Ben turned red, alternating between anger and embarrassment. "Nancy isn't my mistress. She's my partner too." "Your partner?" I repeated, incredulous. "Ben, you've been married to me for 45 years, before the law, before God, before our family. Nancy is your mistress, whether you want to accept it or not." He stood up, pacing nervously around the room. "Things aren't that simple, Eleanor. You can't understand because you've never been through it." "Been through what?" I asked, blocking his path. "Dividing your heart between two people? Lying to two families for decades? Stealing money from your own wife?" Ben pushed me aside, not forcefully, but with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Get out of my way. I'm tired of this conversation." In that moment, something inside me broke for good. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal or the disappointment in the man I loved. It was the humiliation of being treated like an idiot for so long, of being considered so insignificant that he didn't even bother to lie to me properly. "All right," I said, my voice coming out calm for the first time in days. "You're tired of this conversation, so let's have a different conversation." Ben looked at me suspiciously. "What kind of conversation?" I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally understood the rules of the game. "A conversation about consequences," I replied. "About what happens when your two families find out the whole truth about you." Ben's face turned pale. "What do you mean by that?" I sat in the armchair, crossing my legs, and for the first time in weeks, I felt in control of the situation. "I mean, Nancy doesn't know you used our money to support her family, that the children you have with her don't know you have other children here, that everyone at the market knows about your double life, but they pretend they don't." Ben sat down heavily on the sofa. "Eleanor, what are you planning?" "I'm not planning anything," I lied. "I'm just thinking about how interesting it would be if everyone involved in this situation knew the whole truth." I got up from the armchair and went to the window, looking out at the street where I had walked so many times as the respectable wife of Ben Sullivan. You know, for all these years, I protected your reputation without even knowing it. What do you mean? He asked, his voice tense. I never complained about your trips to anyone. I never questioned your spending. I never showed suspicion when you came home smelling of a different perfume. Ben swallowed hard. You knew? I knew something was different, I confessed. But I trusted you. I thought maybe it was a customer's perfume or that you had passed by some cosmetic stall at the market. I always found an innocent explanation for everything. I turned to face him. What a fool I was, wasn't I? The following days were strange. Ben stayed home, clearly nervous, trying to convince me we could solve everything by talking. He promised he would break up with Nancy, that he would go back to being just my husband. But I knew they were lies. A man who lies for 22 years doesn't stop lying overnight. Do you really think I would believe you again? I asked when he made another empty promise. Ben, you deceived me for over 2 decades. You stole our money. You kept a second family. You made a fool of me in front of the whole town. And now you want me to believe you've changed. It was then that he showed his true colors. All right, Eleanor. You found out. Now what? What are you going to do? You have nowhere to go. You have no money of your own. You have no career. Your children have their own lives. You need me more than I need you. His words hit me like a bucket of cold water. And the worst part was, he was right. I had spent my entire life being dependent on him. I never had my own bank account. I never worked outside the home. My identity was completely tied to being his wife. Without him, who was I? You're right, I said, feigning defeat. I need you. Ben relaxed, thinking he had convinced me. Good that you understand. We can leave things as they are. You stay here taking care of our home, and I'll keep working, supporting our family. Our family, not our families. He still wasn't willing to give up Nancy. That night, I lay in bed next to him, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was plotting. Ben had underestimated me. He thought I was just an old, dependent woman with no resources. But he had forgotten one thing. I knew all his secrets. And knowledge is power. The next morning, when Ben left for the market, I called my grandson Jordan, Rose's son. The boy was 22 and sharp in a way his grandfather never was. Jordan, I said when he answered, I need your help with something. Of course, Grandma. What do you need? Jordan had always been my favorite grandchild, though I'd never admit it to anyone. He was smart, observant, and unlike his grandfather, he had character. I need you to help me understand a few things better, I said, choosing my words carefully. You know the people in town well, don't you? You know who talks to whom, who's connected to whom? Jordan laughed. Grandma, I know everyone here. Why are you asking? I took a deep breath. Because your grandmother is going to need a few favors and some information. I arranged to meet Jordan the next afternoon when Ben would be at the market. When my grandson arrived, I explained the whole situation. Jordan was shocked at first, then furious. Grandma, Grandpa really did that. He has another family. I confirmed it, showing him some of the evidence I had found. That son of a bitch, Jordan muttered, and it was the first time I'd ever heard him speak ill of his grandfather. Sorry, Grandma, but I can't believe he did that to you. I held my grandson's hand. Jordan, I need you to help me do a few things. Things that might not be very kind, but are necessary. Say the word, Grandma. After what Grandpa did, he deserves whatever's coming to him. Jordan leaned forward, interested. What do you want to do? I smiled, feeling for the first time in weeks that I had a plan. I want everyone to know the truth about Ben Sullivan. The whole truth. We spent the entire afternoon talking about how we could strategically spread the information. Jordan knew the children of several merchants at the market. He knew who the biggest gossips in town were, who had contact, with whom. Grandma, if you want the whole town to know, I can arrange that in a week. I don't want the whole town to know at once, I explained. I want the information to reach the right people, at the right time. First, I want it to reach the children he has with Nancy. They deserve to know they aren't the only ones. Jordan wrote everything down on a piece of paper. Next, I want it to reach his customers at the market, the people he does business with. And last, Jordan asked, last, I want it to reach Nancy, but not the information she already knows. I want her to know about the money, about how he financed her life with the money he stole from me. Jordan shook his head, impressed. Grandma, you're planning a complete takedown. It's not revenge, I corrected. It's justice. Ben lied to everyone for years. Now it's time for everyone to know who he really is. Jordan stood up, tucking the paper into his pocket. You can count on me, Grandma. In 2 weeks, everyone who needs to know will know. When Ben came home that night, I was in the kitchen preparing dinner as always. He greeted me normally, suspecting nothing. During the meal, we talked about trivial things. The weather, business at the market, the neighbors. He seemed relieved, thinking I had accepted the situation. Eleanor, he said after dinner, I'm glad you've come to understand how things are. I know it's not easy, but it's better this way. For everyone. I smiled at him, a sweet smile I had practiced for decades. You're right, Ben. It is better this way. But inside I was counting the days. Soon Ben's carefully constructed world of lies would begin to crumble. And this time, he would be the one with nowhere to run. The plan started working the following Monday. Jordan had spoken with Marcelo, Mr. Ray's son from the market, who in turn knew some young people in New Orleans. The information began to circulate in a seemingly casual way. Did you guys know that Ben, that seafood guy from St. Genevieve, has a family here too? Meanwhile, I maintained my normal routine, taking care of the house and treating Ben with the same cordiality, as always. He was more relaxed, coming home in a good mood, even bringing small gifts like in the early years of our marriage. Clearly relieved to think I had accepted the situation. You seem different, he commented on Wednesday, hugging me from behind as I washed the dishes. Calmer, more at peace. I smiled, leaning into his hands that were wrapped around my waist. I've realized there's no point in fighting certain things. Sometimes it's better to just accept. Ben kissed my neck, and for the first time in weeks, the gesture didn't make me sick. Not because I had forgiven him, but because I knew that soon he would be the one suffering. I'm glad you understand, he murmured. I know it's not easy, but you'll see it can work out. On Thursday, Jordan called me. Grandma, it worked. Grandpa's oldest daughter with Nancy found out about you and our family. She's really shaken up. I felt a pang of remorse. Jolene, the 21-year-old girl, had grown up believing she was special to her father, that he was always there because he loved her. Now she was discovering that was only half the truth. How did she react? I asked, genuinely concerned. From what I heard, she confronted her mother. She wants to know why they never told her about the family in St. Genevieve. Nancy is trying to explain, but the girl feels like her life has been a lie too. Jordan paused. Grandma, are you sure you want to continue with this? I'm sure, I replied, though my heart was heavy. Those children deserve to know the truth about their father, just like I deserve to know, Jordan agreed. All right, the next step is to get the information to the customers at the market. That should happen by the end of the week. That night, Ben came home earlier than usual, looking worried. Something strange happened today, he said, sitting down heavily in a kitchen chair. Mr. Ray was asking me some strange questions about family. I feigned concern. What kind of questions? He asked if I had relatives in New Orleans, if I'd ever thought of moving there. Said he heard I have connections in the city. Ben looked at me suspiciously. Did you say something to anyone? I shook my head energetically. Of course not. You said yourself it was better to keep things as they are. That's true, he muttered, but he remained worried. Must be a coincidence. Or maybe someone saw me with them, and started a rumor. I served dinner, watching how nervous he was, eating slowly, lost in thought. For the first time, Ben was getting a taste of insecurity. On Saturday, the situation exploded. Jordan called me early. Grandma, there's a problem. Jolene, Grandpa's daughter, came to St. Genevieve. She's looking for you. My heart pounded. Looking for me? Why? Jordan sighed. She wants to talk. She wants to understand this whole story. Where is she? I asked, already grabbing my purse. In the town square near the church. She's alone. Looks very upset. I left the house quickly, telling Ben I was going shopping. When I arrived at the square, I saw a young, pretty woman sitting on a bench, clearly nervous. Jolene, I called, approaching slowly. She looked up, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She had Ben's eyes, the same expression I saw in him when he was young. Are you Eleanor? She asked, her voice trembling. I confirmed, sitting next to her on the bench. I had to meet you, Jolene said, tears starting to fall. I had to understand how my father could have two families for so long. I looked at this girl, who was the result of my husband's betrayal but was also a victim of his lies. Don't miss the next videos. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to stay up to date. Back to the story. Jolene? I began, choosing my words carefully. I only found out about you all a few weeks ago. Until then, I didn't know you existed. She looked at me with surprise. You didn't know either? I shook my head. Your father hid you from me the same way he hid me from you. We talked for over an hour. Jolene told me about her childhood with Ben, about how he was present but sometimes distant, about how the family always found it strange that he didn't want to officially marry Nancy. Mom always said he was a free spirit, that he didn't like paperwork. Now I understand why. I'm so sorry, Jolene said, surprising me. I'm so sorry my father did this to you. You didn't deserve it. I took her hand. You're not to blame for any of this. You and your siblings are victims, just like me. Jolene cried a little more. But we took his time from you. The money that was yours. The money? I asked, pretending not to know. What money? Jolene looked at me, confused. The money he always gave our family. For our house, our food, our clothes. Wasn't that his money? I took a deep breath. Not entirely. Part of it was ours, mine and his, saved over many years. I saw the exact moment Jolene understood the extent of her father's lies. Her face turned pale, and she brought a hand to her mouth. He was using your money to support us? I nodded. Without me knowing, he transferred half of our savings to a new account, which I discovered by accident. Oh my God, Jolene murmured. What am I going to tell my mother? My brothers? I held her hands. Tell them the truth. You all deserve to know who he really is. Jolene stood up, agitated. I have to go back to New Orleans. I have to tell my family everything. Jolene? I called as she started to walk away. Are you going to tell your father you met me? She stopped, thinking. I don't know. I need to think about all this. She nodded sadly and left the square, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I returned home to find an anxious Ben. Where were you? I was worried. I showed him the shopping bags I had quickly filled at the store. I was delayed because I ran into Clara, and we got to talking. Ben seemed relieved. How is she? Did you two make up? Not yet, I lied. But we're trying. Ben nodded, distracted. Good. It's important to keep up friendships. I spent the rest of the day watching him, noticing how he was more nervous than usual. He checked his phone constantly, as if expecting an important call. On Monday, the bomb exploded. Ben came home at noon, pale and agitated. Eleanor, I have to go to New Orleans today. It's urgent. I feigned concern. What happened? A problem with the business? He avoided my gaze. It's a family problem. I need to sort some things out. Family? I asked, knowing exactly what he meant. What family? Ben looked at me with irritation. You know what family, Eleanor. Don't pretend you don't. This time I didn't pretend. Oh, you mean Nancy and the children you had with her. What's their problem? Jolene found out about you, he said, collapsing into a chair. She came here, talked to someone, and now she's stirring up trouble at home. Nancy is frantic. The boys are confused. I need to go there and explain the situation. I smiled inwardly. The plan was working perfectly. And what are you going to explain? I asked. That you lied to them for years? That you have another family here? That you used our money to support them? Ben stood up abruptly. You don't understand the situation. It's complicated. I laughed, a sound that came out more bitter than I intended. Complicated is the favorite word of a man who doesn't want to take responsibility. Ben quickly packed a bag and left the house without a proper goodbye. For the first time, he was running to deal with the fallout, trying to put out the fire he had started. But I knew it was too late. Some truths, once revealed, cannot be hidden again. That night, alone in the house, I called Jordan. How are things? I asked. Grandma, the whole town is talking. The people at the market are all talking about Grandpa's double life. Some are shocked. Others say they always suspected. Jordan paused. Are you feeling okay with all this? I'm feeling free, I answered. And it was the first time I'd said that word in weeks. For the first time in a long time, I'm feeling free. Jordan chuckled softly. I can only imagine how Grandpa must be feeling right now. I smiled, looking out the window at the empty street. He must be discovering just how hard it is to maintain a lie when it starts to fall apart. Ben stayed in New Orleans for nearly 2 weeks, the longest he'd ever been away. During that time, I received 3 calls from Nancy, each one more desperate than the last. In the first, she was still trying to understand what was happening. In the second, she was furious. In the third, she was completely broken. Eleanor, she said in the last call, her voice choked from crying. I found out about the money, about the bank account, about everything. I waited in silence, letting her speak. My children are devastated. Jolene won't speak to her father anymore. Marcus is furious, said he wants nothing to do with him. Only Patricia doesn't really understand, but she's only 15. I'm sorry, I said. And it was true. I was sorry for those children who were not to blame for their father's lies. Nancy, you need to understand that I'm a victim in this story too. I was also deceived. She sobbed on the other end of the line. I know, but now I don't know what to do. Ben is desperate, trying to explain. But how do you explain 22 years of lies? You can't, I replied. Some things have no explanation. They only have consequences. Nancy was silent for a few minutes. Eleanor, can I ask you a question? I agreed. Did you plan this? Did you make my children find out about you? I thought carefully about the answer. Nancy, I didn't make your children find out about me. They found out about the truth about their father, about the money he used to support you, about the lies he told everyone. I paused. If that caused them pain, the fault is not mine. It's the man's who chose to live a double life. When I hung up the phone, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. Satisfaction because Ben was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Sadness because innocent people were suffering in the process. But I remembered the cruel words he had said to me. You got old, Eleanor. Nancy gives me joy. Some wounds deserve to be healed with justice. During Ben's absence, I discovered things about myself that I had forgotten. I discovered that I could sleep better alone, that I could eat what I wanted, when I wanted, that I could watch my shows without interruption. Small freedoms I had lost over 4.5 decades of marriage. Jordan came to visit me almost every day, worried about my well-being. "Grandma, how are you feeling?" he asked during one of these visits. "I'm fine," I replied, and I realized it was true. For the first time in a long time. "I'm really fine," Jordan smiled. "You seem different. More strong." "I feel strong," I admitted. "I spent weeks feeling destroyed, humiliated, as if my life was worthless. But now I understand that he's the one who's worthless. I was worth something all those years. I was the one who kept our house, our family, our life running, while he was playing house with 2 families. It was during this conversation with Jordan that I made my final decision. "Jordan, I need you to help me with one more thing." He leaned forward, interested. "What do you need, Grandma?" I took a deep breath. "I need to find a lawyer. I need to know what my rights are regarding our assets." "You want a divorce?" Jordan asked, surprised. "I don't know yet, but I want to know what is mine by right. The house, the money, the business, everything we built together over 45 years. Jordan nodded enthusiastically. "I know a good lawyer, Mr. Antonio. He helped my cousin when he got divorced. Want me to make an appointment?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "But don't tell anyone yet. I want to understand my situation before making any decisions." Jordan agreed. "You got it, Grandma. This stays between us." That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept deeply. I had a plan. I had goals. I had hope. Ben returned on a Thursday, looking like he had aged 10 years. He walked in with his head down, without the usual greeting. "How was the trip?" I asked, as if it were a normal business trip. He looked at me with an expression that mixed anger and defeat. "You know how it was." "I don't," I lied. "You didn't tell me what happened." Ben collapsed onto the sofa. "Jolene won't talk to me anymore. Marcus said I'm a liar, that I'm no role model. Nancy is talking about ending things. The situation is a mess." I felt a pang of satisfaction that I tried to disguise. "And what are you going to do?" I asked. Ben ran his hands over his face, tired. "I don't know. Nancy is demanding that I choose. Either I stay with her for good, divorcing you, or she ends everything." I looked at him, waiting. "And what's your choice?" "I don't want to choose," he said like a spoiled child. "Why do I have to choose? Things were working fine the way they were." The anger rose within me. "They worked for you, Ben. You had 2 families, 2 houses, 2 women taking care of you. Of course it worked for you." "Eleanor, you said you understood," he retorted. "You said you could accept the situation." I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "I lied, just like you lied to me for 22 years. Ben looked at me in shock. "You lied?" "I learned from the best," I replied. "You taught me that lying is a way to get what you want, so I lied to make you feel secure while I planned my own life." I stood up from my chair, feeling an energy I hadn't felt in decades. "Ben, I want you to get out of my house." "Your house?" he shouted, standing up too. "This house is as much mine as it is yours. I paid for it. I maintained it all these years." I laughed, a sound that came out stronger than I intended. "With what money, Ben? With the money you stole from me to support your second family. With the money you transferred to an account I didn't even know existed." "I didn't steal anything," he said, but his voice didn't sound convincing. "That money was mine too." I walked up to him, looking him in the eyes for the first time since I discovered the betrayal. "It was ours, Ben. Ours. Built with the work and sacrifice of 2 people. You had no right to use half of it without my consent. So what do you want?" he asked, his voice lower. "You want to fight in court? You want to destroy everything we built together?" I smiled again. "I don't want to destroy anything. You already destroyed it. I just want to get back what's mine." The argument continued late into the night, but this time it was different. This time, I wasn't begging for explanations or asking him to choose me. I was demanding my rights. I was fighting for what was mine. And for the first time in our life together, Ben was on the defensive. "You've changed," he said at one point, as if it were an accusation. "You're not the same person anymore." I stopped talking and faced him. "You're right. I have changed. The woman who accepted your lies in silence died the day I discovered your betrayal. The woman standing here now is different." "I don't like this new version of you," he said cruelly. "I preferred the old Eleanor. It felt like he had given me a gift." "I'm glad you said that, because the old Eleanor really is dead, and she's never coming back." I walked towards the bedroom. "You can sleep on the sofa tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk about how we're going to divide our things." Ben stood in the living room, in shock. "Divide our things? Eleanor, are you serious about a divorce?" I stopped at the bedroom door. "I'm serious about justice, Ben. About each of us getting what we deserve." I went into the bedroom and locked the door. I lay on the bed, alone, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't cry. I didn't feel sorry for myself. I didn't miss the man on the other side of the door. I just felt a deep peace, the peace of someone who had finally found her own voice. The next morning, Ben knocked on the bedroom door. "Eleanor, I have to go out. I'm going to the market." I didn't answer. I heard him moving around the house, getting his things, and then I heard the door close. When I got up, I found a note on the kitchen table. "Eleanor, we can talk when I get back. Maybe we can sort all this out." I tore up the note and threw it in the trash. Some things could no longer be sorted out with a conversation. Some betrayals were too big to be forgiven. Some lies were too deep to be forgotten. I picked up the phone and called Jordan. "Can you make that appointment with the lawyer?" "I'm ready." The meeting with Mr. Antonio was revealing. Sitting in his small office with Jordan by my side for moral support, I discovered I had more rights than I ever imagined. "Ms. Eleanor," the lawyer explained, "your marriage entitles you to 50% of all assets acquired during the union. That includes the house, the business, all the savings. Even the money he transferred to the other family's account?" I asked. Mr. Antonio nodded. "Especially that money. He could not transfer marital property without your consent. That could be considered dissipation of assets." I felt an immense relief. Finally, someone was telling me I had rights, that I wasn't just the old, disposable woman Ben had made me feel like. "There's another matter," the lawyer continued. "Your husband's business. As I understand it, he's had a stall at the market for over 20 years. That is also part of the marital estate." Jordan squeezed my hand. "Does that mean Grandma can get half the business?" Mr. Antonio confirmed. "She can get half, or she can demand that it be sold, and the money divided." I left the lawyer's office with a sense of power I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, I had a concrete plan based on legal rights, not on pleas or attempts to win back the love of a man who didn't respect me. When Ben came home that night, I was waiting for him in the living room. "We need to talk," I said, sitting in the armchair across from him. "About our future." Ben looked relieved. "I'm glad you want to talk. We can sort this out, Eleanor. We can go back to how we were." "We can't," I said simply. "There's no going back, Ben. Not after everything you've done." He leaned forward. "Eleanor, I can break up with Nancy. I can go back to being just your husband. I know I made mistakes, but we can start over." I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "You don't understand. I don't want you to break up with Nancy. I don't want you to be just my husband." "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. "I mean, I don't want to be your wife anymore." The words came out more easily than I imagined. "I want to divorce you, Ben. I want to divide our assets and rebuild my life." Ben turned pale. "Eleanor, you can't be serious. You're 70 years old. What are you going to do on your own?" "I'll find out," I replied. "For the first time in 45 years, I'm going to find out who I am when I'm not somebody's wife." Ben stood up, agitated. "This is crazy. You have nowhere to go, no money of your own, no career. You need me." "I will have my own money," I said, standing up as well. "Half of everything we built together. Half the house, half the business, half of the savings that are left. Ben looked at me in disbelief. You can't do this. You can't take half of everything I've worked to build. I work too, I said, my voice firmer. I work taking care of our house, our family, our life. While you were building a second family with another woman, I was here, keeping everything running. I deserve half of everything that is ours. The argument that followed was epic. Ben alternated between anger, pleading, and trying to convince me I was making a mistake. Nancy already broke up with me. He confessed at one point. She said she wants nothing more to do with me. The kids won't talk to me. I've lost everything over there. Don't make me lose you, too. You lost me the moment you chose to lie to me, I replied. I'm not the one who destroyed our marriage. You are. Ben tried to hug me, but I stepped away. Eleanor, I love you. I've always loved you. Nancy was a mistake, an old man's folly. But you are my wife, my life partner. If you loved me, I said, looking directly into his eyes, you wouldn't have humiliated me for 22 years. If you loved me, you wouldn't have used our money to support another family. If you loved me, you wouldn't have said I got old, and that she brought you joy. Ben lowered his head. I said things I shouldn't have. I was confused, desperate. You said the truth, I corrected. For the first time in decades, you said exactly what you thought of me, and now I know where I stood on your list of priorities. I walked to the window, looking out at the street where I had walked so many times as his wife. Ben, you can be with Nancy, or you can be alone, but you can't be with me anymore. The following week, we officially began the divorce process. Ben tried to resist, hired a lawyer, tried to argue that I wasn't entitled to half the business. But the documents were clear. Everything had been acquired during our marriage, with joint effort. The law was on my side. The whole town found out about the divorce. Some neighbors came to visit, curious about the details. Others avoided me, as if divorce were contagious. But for the first time, I didn't care what people thought. I was doing what was right for me. The hardest moment was when Charles and Rose came to talk to me. Mom, are you sure this is what you want? Charles asked. You've lived so many years with Dad. Maybe he can change. I looked at my children. These two people I had raised with so much love. Children, do you want me to continue living a lie? Do you want me to accept being the second choice of a man who deceived me for over 20 years? Of course not, Rose said, holding my hand. We just want you to be happy. I smiled at her. Then support my decision. For the first time in a long time, I am choosing my own happiness. My children hugged me, and I felt I finally had the support I needed. The divorce process took 6 months. During that time, I discovered things about Ben I didn't know. I found out he had lied about various aspects of the business, that there were debts I was unaware of, that the financial situation wasn't as good as he had led me to believe. But I also discovered that I was entitled to more than I had imagined. When everything was settled, I got the house, half the remaining money, and half the market business. Ben tried to keep his share of the business, but found he could no longer work there. His reputation was ruined. Everyone knew about the double life, the betrayal, the embezzled money. Customers no longer trusted him. I'm going to have to sell my share, he said in one of our last conversations. I can't work at the market anymore. Everyone looks at me like I'm a criminal. I felt a pang of satisfaction I didn't try to hide. Sometimes the consequences of our actions take a while to arrive, but they always do. I bought his share of the business with the money I received from the settlement. At 73, I became a businesswoman. Jordan helped me manage the stall, and I discovered I had a knack for sales. The customers liked me, trusted me. Many came to buy seafood but stayed to talk about their lives, their problems. Miss Eleanor, a customer said one morning, you seem different, happier, more alive. I smiled, arranging the shrimp on the ice. I feel alive. For the first time in a long time, I'm living for myself. The customer nodded. You did the right thing, getting divorced. A man who cheats doesn't deserve a second chance. 6 months after the divorce, I heard that Ben had tried to get back with Nancy, but she wouldn't take him. His children still weren't speaking to him. He was living alone in a small rented room, working as a helper at another market, earning much less than before. Grandma, Jordan said one afternoon, Grandpa's not doing well. He's drinking, he's thin, he looks sick. I felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it passed quickly. He made his choices, Jordan. Now he's living with the consequences. Jordan looked at me with admiration. You're so strong, Grandma. I'm not strong, I corrected. I'm fair. There's a difference. I continued arranging the fish. For a long time, I confused being good with being a fool. I confused loving with accepting disrespect. I confused being a wife with being a doormat. Jordan smiled. And now? Now I know the difference, I replied. And I know I deserve to be treated with respect. I looked around my market stall, at the customers who greeted me warmly, at the life I had built with my own hands. Jordan, do you know what my greatest revenge against your grandfather was? What, Grandma? I smiled, feeling a deep peace. It wasn't spreading his secrets all over town. It wasn't taking half the assets. It wasn't letting everyone know what kind of man he was. I paused, savoring the moment. My greatest revenge was discovering that I could be happy without him, that I could start over at 73, that I could be Eleanor Sullivan, not just Ben's wife. Today, 2 years later, I have my own business, my own life, my own story. I wake up when I want, eat what I want, watch what I want on television. I get visits from my children and grandchildren, who respect me more than ever. I have friends at the market, customers who have become friends, a social life I never had when I was married. Sometimes people ask if I don't miss being married, if I don't regret getting a divorce. I reply that I miss the marriage I thought I had, not the marriage I actually had. I miss the man I thought Ben was, not the man he truly was. Don't miss the next videos. Subscribe now and turn on notifications to stay up to date. Back to the story. My revenge against Ben was epic, but not in the way he expected. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't destructive. It was constructive. It was transformative. It was liberating. He lost 2 families. He lost his reputation. He lost his business. But I gained something I never had. My own life. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see a 73-year-old woman who discovered it's never too late to start over. A woman who learned that dignity has no age, that respect has no expiration date, that life can begin again as many times as necessary. This is my story. The story of a woman who was betrayed, who suffered, who almost lost herself, but who found a strength inside her she never knew she had. A woman who turned pain into wisdom, humiliation into dignity, betrayal into liberation. And if anyone asks me if it was worth it, I answer without hesitation. It was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of pain, because it all brought me here, to this life that is truly my own. And that, yes, is an epic revenge.